Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this. Thank you so much to Chris for his introduction and the use of his shop yesterday. Thank you to Clemmer and David Montague for hosting the nice potluck and for hosting myself last night. And thank you for coming out and expressing your interest in ironwork. I'm going to basically summarize my studio. I realized this past year I've been doing it full-time for a little over 10 years. So what we have is a little bit of everything, some techniques, some finished, in process, and as Chris mentioned, the Iron Design company represents about half the studio. The other half of the studio is custom commission work, so you're going to see the balance of it too. So the first question that one always gets when you're a blacksmith is, how do you become a blacksmith? There's not necessarily schools or even blacksmiths in abundance to learn from. Well, I had it easy. I learned blacksmithing from my father. And my father's the one at the anvil. And he's working on some sign bracket parts. The shapes of the anvil are those guys. Wait, I got a pointer. Those. And I grew up in North Jersey, which is in Sussex County, which also hosts Peters Valley Craft Center. Some of you may have been there. It's a very pretty non-parkway part of New Jersey. And he was kind of an unofficial resident, and he paid his rent by making this sign bracket, so it hung there for many, many years. And so here's the guys hauling up a big, heavy chunk of ironwork onto the roof. And I started out with these images because I thought how funny it is that, other than the length of hair, not much has really changed. And so here I am with a bunch of guys hauling some heavy ironwork. And this is at the Penland School of Crafts, where I was a resident for 3 years. And this is the grand staircase that I was privileged to make. And there it is. Everything you'll see today is steel. I know it's Iron Design Company, but technically it's steel. And my shop is pretty much set up very much so like a blacksmithing shop, with a few modern conveniences. And as an iron worker, I do take a lot of pride in knowing my material. The end result really has to be metal, even though sometimes it gets maybe confused for rope or fabric because of those smooth lines. In the end, it really has to exhibit those qualities that make it metal. So strength, everyone's very familiar with steel's strength attributes. And then it does have weaknesses, and this was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen as far as something in steel. This is the bottom of an I-beam that has corroded out over years and years and years. This is in a minerals plant in North Carolina. And it basically has lost its structural integrity and has started to roll underneath itself. So that erosion created the weakness, and the weight of the roof is pushed down on that. And when you're a blacksmith, one of the first things you learn how to make is a scroll by hand. Well, there's another example of a scroll happening. This is an iron mine in Cranberry, North Carolina. And often when I teach, I'll bring them out to this mine. It's cavernous, it's incredible. We all walk around with magnets, and you could follow the iron seam in the tunnels. But again, when I work iron, I have those qualities very much in my mind. And also, the metal is very industrial, whether one as an artist wants to accept that or not. And I think as an artist and a creative person, you can get carried away, forget how industrial and how architectural the metal can be. And when I saw these tongs, I use tongs every day, but they're this big. And this pair of tongs, I could fit my head in. So it, once again reminds you that you are a part of a much larger. And so these are these are some really unique tools that I made to show that heaviness and industrialness of steel. It's basically these chunks that I brought back from the scrapyard, and I made these sweet little handles for these hand-carved handles to slip onto and be riveted onto. It is really meant to convey that industrialness and the weight behind this material that we work so often, and when we do our job right, it defies gravity, much like the gate downstairs. So those fundamentals that I learned from my father as a blacksmith, I took to college with me. My father, at the time I learned blacksmithing, was working out of a single-car garage with really not much more than an anvil, a coal fire, and some hammers and tongs. And that was my introduction. So what I took from that is just the ability to do the most with the least. And by the time I got out to Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, I had a jump start because I really understood how to make that metal move, how important the heat was. And so when I was a student, my emphasis ended up being, as far as student work, based on these geologic classes I was taking, and plate tectonics, and how no motion is ever lost. If something is rifting somewhere, then it's compressing somewhere else. So this piece, Push-Pull, is one of my favorites from the time period, where you've got those extremes in one piece. You've got the tensile actions pulling apart in the bottom, and the compressive actions slamming against each other on the top. And this was given to me by blacksmith Tom Joyce, and it's actually African currency. And why I like it so much is because of what happens between this slide and this slide. And this is how steel is made, rarely how it used to be made. But what he's pulling out is what's called a loop. And in that loop, in that big ball of spongy iron, is a whole bunch of impurities, silica, and phosphorus, and in the process of drawing it down and down and down, you're refining it and making the steel stronger. And that's exactly what happens with this tajiri, I think it's called. They took all these little scraps of iron, they fused them together, and they drew them out and refined them. And that shape is just so evident of what happens in the mill. Mass to line. And a lot of my work tries to highlight that moment when mass becomes line. And this is me at Penland, just another day of work on my birthday. There's a much longer story behind that. So when I came to Penland as a resident, I was very much interested in highlighting those malleable qualities. So this is a serving tray that's maybe about 11.5, 12 inches long. But when I started, it was a piece of flat stock that was maybe only 3 inches wide. So when steel is very hot, it moves very much like clay. So underneath the power hammer, I was able to pinch out that material, the original mass in the middle, much like that, where'd you go? My finger's on it. Much like that tajiri, the original mass is in the middle, and then you pinch that material out and out and out and turn what was maybe something linear into a plane. And all that texture is directly from the forging process. Of course, that translated into functional work as well. This is spatula. But most of my time as a Penland resident was making sculpture. And that was really trying to get to that moment between mass and line. My artist statement was slimmed down to one line. I wanted to illustrate that transition between mass and line. So I kind of tucked away the hammer a little bit. I tucked away the forge a little bit. I tried to get to the element of things, and I started building three-dimensional and two-dimensional objects that really illustrated how one could have so much mass and what else it could be. So there's always this moment in this series, and this is maybe 12 feet or so across, all three combined, maybe 32 inches tall. On this whole series, you'll see some blockiness, and then this kind of wispiness coming out of that blockiness as almost kind of a what if. We could be this, and really kind of defying its initial origin. This is the third one in the series. I made a bunch of these tiles that were maybe 12 inches tall. At first I started pulling little pieces out and forging them, but I really wanted that really quick connection from mass to line, and trying to find that moment that kind of sucked you in. And so I would make stuff at the anvil, and then maybe I would combine traditional techniques, forging, with contemporary techniques like electric welding. I've always wanted to put a ball bearing on the back of these so you could just kind of spin them around. This is another one, maybe close to 3 foot tall. And so that center element here is a piece of plate that's been cut and formed very minimally. And then the fun, the heat, the hammering, the noise comes with making this sweet little scroll. This is another one I think would also work if you turned it 9 degrees. This is Shady Sequence. This was one of my favorite in this series. And there's, of course, many more of each one of these. This is probably 4 foot tall from top to bottom. Again, it's combining all these techniques. I think during this phase, I was trying to have the natural blackening of steel be the only color. Whatever came out of the fire, we waxed it and left it alone. So everything was just very much about the metal. And here you've got, you know, some fabrication, you've got some bending, and then you've got some heavy forging here where, you know, my original diameter was here and was drawn out to either side. This is on the move, I think also 4 feet, so things are starting to grow as well. Formed and fabricated, so the image doesn't show it that much, but there is, this part is fabricated, so it's hollow on the inside, maybe 3 inches or so deep, with this forged element that is peeling out of it. When I got to Penland, besides making sculpture, what naturally happens when one's an ironworker is people very much so understand it's an architectural material. And so I would get requests, even though not having much background information or experience in making custom ironwork, it naturally found me. And so this was one of the very first commissioned things I made when I was 24 or so, and it was obviously a fire screen for a couple not too far from the Penland community. They kind of had an arts and crafts style house. And early on I started to get how important the relationship building process was, the commissioning process, how difficult it is, but if you're honest and you're open, you could really build some really wonderful things and make everyone happy. Over time I did develop a sense as far as the architectural work. This is a small railing at Penland. Forge. So for those of you who were at the workshop yesterday, we did some things where we bent the metal back upon itself like a U and then took that material and pulled itself out. Well, that's another example on either end, just working larger. Another railing. Again, one step maybe more advanced as far as how the handrail meets the post. You're flattening, you're bending, but now you've got some twisting action going on, so these things are starting to pop and become a little bit more dynamic. This is the Bascom railing. It's at the Bascom house. It's quite often someone hires me to do railings, and we put the railings in, and they go, "Oh, I need better steps." And this is an example. I kind of forgot about that part. Door hardware. This was at the Penland Barns. The residence where we work at Penland is basically one old dairy barn with 6 studios in it, and they did a little reconstruction while I was there, and the maintenance guys made this great wooden door and wanted some hardware, so this was my approach. Made a bunch of door pulls. And sometimes when you're replicating such a complex shape, I think for these I did make basically a jig, and what the jig allowed me to do is it allowed me to not necessarily, I mean, help keep things consistent, but speed up some of these bends right through here. Because what you're doing is you pretty much, you see that S bend? That's when things get interesting. That's when things start to be eye-catching. And metal doesn't always want to do it, so sometimes you gotta really push it along. I did a handful of other things while I was at Penland. This was a piece of public art I made for the town of Spruce Pine, North Carolina. Spruce Pine's whole economy is based on the extraction of silicate minerals, mica, feldspar, quartz. And so if I'm making a piece of art for the town, well then it should really reflect what the town is based on. And so this is the silicate tetrahedron. You've got one silicon model element surrounded by 4 oxygens. And that's Corten steel. And if you're wondering, wow, that looks awfully close to the road, has it ever been hit by a car? I'll just say it has. We'll just get that out of the way now. But metal bends before it breaks, so you can unbend it. Lots of auctions and odd events at Penland, and I can't even keep up with the amount of little tools that went into auctions and that were traded out with other people. This is a scribe that I forge welded down, and if you look closely, the tip is just a little bit darker than the rest of the body, and that's because I forge welded in a piece of tool steel to I want to say very traditional technique, but my approach was just a little bit different to polish it and go back in and etch it and really have it stand out. The very first class I taught at Penland was in 2004. When you're a resident, it doesn't really come with the territory. It's kind of a privilege to teach. You have to be asked. And when I taught this class, it was Penland's 75th anniversary, and they were putting in a time capsule. And I'm teaching this class for the first time, and it's a beginning blacksmithing class, and I've got all these guys and gals taking this class for the very first time. And I was into basically smelting iron at the time in very minor amounts. So I wanted to contribute to the time capsule in a very memorable way. So around each anvil would be fire scale that would come off while they're hammering, and those of you who were at the workshop yesterday witnessed that. In that fire scale that would come out, there's still iron available. You just have to get it to a malleable point. So I smelted out of each one's pile of scale these tiny little ingots that I forged out into each shape. So each one of these represents one of the students taking blacksmithing for the first time, and they're made out of the scale that came off their projects that they hit for the first time. So those are in the ground somewhere. And they just did it with a torch and a fire brick and a very dark lens, because it's like staring at the sun. I made one or two of these sculptures. They're maybe 7 foot tall, solid bar, forged down, really trying to pick up on the movement, the waspiness, and really kind of flirting with the idea of having something so thin, but still stable. And that translated into some hardware. This is a door latch for the Penland director, Gene. Forged steel, and the other side matches and has all the mechanisms. Also at Penland, there's many cultural events that pretty much not just encompass you, but encompass campus, and this is Easter. So the beauty of being at a craft school at Easter is everything steps up a notch as far as Easter eggs. And they let the little kids chase after the plastic eggs, but then the adults come in with hundreds of handmade eggs. And so my final year of being a resident, I teamed up with a buddy of mine who's a glass blower, and we made a steel and glass egg. And on the bottom of the egg, I welded on an auger bit that we screwed into the ground about 20 inches. And I think you can kind of see us. We sat up on the hill and split a 6-pack of beer and just pretty much watched all of our friends cycle through, and we were mean. We put it in like the muddiest spot we could find. And so this is Janine, and Janine would be the person to take the hour to dig, and she dug and she dug and she dug, and she realized what was going on and sent someone for a pipe wrench, and finally got it out of the ground. So we're living in Southwest Virginia, and when I say we, this is Robin. Robin's from Southwest Virginia, post-Penland. Strangely enough, with tons and tons of equipment and work, you end up being the more flexible person in a relationship, because I could almost work anywhere. So we moved up the mountain chain from Penland, 2.5 hours north of Penland, to Southwest Virginia, a little north of Abingdon, if you guys are familiar with the area. This is the farm she grew up on. She's 8th generation, which is always funny because my grandfather wasn't born in the country. I'm from New Jersey. She's from Southern Virginia. We butt heads somewhat often. And this is where we're living, and this is, I don't know, a recent snowstorm, and this is what happens when you try to go sledding on the farm. All the animals think they're getting fed. So once we moved to Southwest Virginia, and we're actually getting ready to move again into Abingdon, the projects just pretty much continued. So this is a railing for an architect in Asheville. I love this slide because I always wonder if I was like backed into the corner by that dog. A bed. And actually, I've known these collectors for a very long time, and I made these when I was a student. If you're wondering if they're heavy, they are. And these parts are hollow, and these parts are solid. And it's much easier to pull off those complicated, dynamic S-curving bends with a solid piece of bar as opposed to pipe. The pipe will just want to kink, and you can't get those fluid lines. And I mocked these things up in prototypes and out of clay and paper, and at some point built a bed frame or broad bed frame in, and as I was building, I'd put it in place and just test and test and test. And you know, we leveled this one out, so that becomes a shelf. And you know, all these are pitched back in a certain way, so you really have to be jumping around to hit your head, and made sure none of these were top heavy. And you know, so often I see a friend of mine that comes back from visiting their place or slept in the bed, and I'm always looking them over for stitches on the forehead, but so far so good. Post-bed, I did a series of sculptures, because you start looking at all these things that are happening in here, and they could easily stand alone as something pretty dynamic. So these are little maquettes, maybe a foot, 13, 14 inches tall. I made a handful of them, and they were all, it was kind of the Settle series. They were all supposed to illustrate the presence of gravity. A few of them were built large scale. This is, I don't know, the dimensions are like 7 foot by 6 foot by 4 foot or 5 foot, something like that. All solid bar. This is another one. This is, was taken at the Metals Museum. I had a solo show out there maybe a year ago. In the background, you can see one of those maquettes. I love to put glass over it. You know, I pretty much threw it in the back of my truck on the way out, and they put the glass screen over it. The couple that own this, and I love when this happens. So here I am thinking I'm building this sculpture for one set of reasons, and a couple sees it and they buy it, and they say, well, you know why we bought it? It was just so representative of love in our relationship, and here you have these two loops, but they're actually one, and they're nestling. And I thought, I never even saw that until right now. But it was very sweet. This is set hand railings for the School of the Arts in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Solid bar as well. Upper and lower, so the one I just showed is up there. And then this is another one. They also need to redo their steps. So how do I make all the smooth lines? You're looking at some of this stuff going, no way is he putting that in the fire. No, you're right. I built a hydraulic bar bender. So all those gradual lines on the gate downstairs and those railings were bent cold. I'm only one person, and I need a little power, and 25 tons from this apparatus helps. And so these guys could come off, and I could build specific tooling. And it's my baby. I don't quite understand how I got along without it. And it's not uncommon to be building stuff in the blacksmithing shop, not just little tools. You know, if you need a little chisel or an engraver, that's great. We got all the skills to make those specific tools. What happens is you start learning about electricity and hydraulics, and somebody gives you something, and you hold on to it, and you say, I just need 3 discs, and I'm like, well, let's just make something that will cut discs out of what we have, and there you have it, a little disc cutter. Back to some railings. These are railings in Atlanta. The ends forged out. This is Chevy Chase, I think, somewhat local. And you've got 2 independent pieces that are bolted together. One handrail, or the bottom part of the handrail is forged out, and you can see how it goes from thick to thin. And then another piece that is not forged, but has this really delightful S-curve that sneaks underneath it. And what the whole thing does is it does this slight twist from top to bottom. So your hand kind of does that as you go up. This is why I was part of 40 Under 40, I believe. Nicholas saw this and said, can you make us one? I said, no, I'll make you something like it. This house is in Raleigh. It's completely trapezoidal. There's no square rooms in the whole house. And the reason why they were really interested in my ironwork is that the entrance to the house is on this side of the staircase, and the views in the living area is on this side of the staircase. So they wanted something very fluid and open. And you're probably wondering, since this is a new home, how did you pass code? Well, there were all these panels that bolted in, and they said, well, this will be great. We could always put them back up when we have parties and the kids come over, and they haven't been up in 3 years. They're down in the basement. some neat things that came out of the staircase was these oversized treads. So they came out beyond the stairs. And one thing they wanted, and I was pretty into, was having the ironwork descend below the overhanging treads. And you know, I have no engineering degree, but it's so often you end up staring at some little task that you need to solve. And, you know, this was one of them. So, you know, to get this done right, these are made out of pipe, and these are solid, and they slip through the wood, but also into the post. And there's little Allen screws in the back that tighten everything up. And this is my favorite moment of the whole railing. This is where one plane goes to the next, and it's totally caught. It's completely captured in that twist, in that S-bend right there. And when you take one of these off, not nearly as dramatic. You put two of them on there, and it really has some movement. Set of sculptures I did, playing with multiples, since I don't do that too much on the larger railing work. Back to the initial drawdown of heavy material in the mills and the African currency. I wanted to be under the power hammer. I wanted to feel the malleability of the metal. And the fun thing about these are you could take one and pretty much bend it over your knee. But together, they become this structural unit. And very architectural, very quick, and something I didn't really see in my little clay maquettes. I put these together, and immediately you're being drawn into these overlapping shapes. This is a draw number 2. The first one was draw number 1. This is draw number 2. It's maybe 2 feet tall. And back to that engineering stuff. Well, it's not about how it's together, but you have to get it together to be a solid unit. So there's actually a layer of these on the outside that have been welded from the inside and basically made a tube and slipped the one inside the other. Here they are at the Metals Museum, a selection of them. There's the gate in the shop. There's some process of the gate. So this is the moment, actually. Look at this one first. So there it is. And, you know, very much essential are this structure here that pretty much locked in my dimensions. I could build, I could do anything I want, but they have to stay within those dimensions. And then the moment of truth really was this. And the whole time, my design from the beginning was I wanted to challenge this defiance of gravity, have it still be structural, but not have this frame that it was really rooted to. So the mystique about the gate downstairs is that this thing is structurally stable because of these draping lines, essentially this right here. And once you lock them all together, it's not going to go anywhere. The problem is it takes 5 weeks of work to get to that point to know if it's going to work or not. This is, you know, another way to use your anvils. It's a set of railings I made for Duke University. They just redid their gardens. And they're aluminum that ended up being powder-coated black. This was very close to materializing. I was hired to do the entrance gate design for the Contemporary Art Museum in Winston-Salem. Funding was there, they loved the design, hit the nail on the head, everybody loved it. And then if you've ever been to the museum, it goes through kind of a neighborhood, a very residential area. And not long after we secured funding to make the gate, the town decided, well, you know what you guys really need is an exit off the highway. So that whole entrance won't even exist soon. So that is 10 to 15 years out at this point, if ever. So constantly drawing, trying to record my thoughts, always generating new ideas. That's what I do. And when I sit down at lunch, I've got a roll of paper out in front of me, and I pretty much doodle, very haphazardly, mostly just trying to capture things. And at some point, you end up with all these rolls of paper that you don't know what to do with. Well, I made what I'm calling a scroll sketch. And this frame that's got the rolls on the inside, so I could turn the brass knob and pretty much go back through my sketches, my record. And of course, you know, half of those sketches were how I was going to build the scroll sketch. So Iron Design Company, when I moved to Southwest Virginia, I freaked out a little bit. Very rural, and I felt the need of having stuff that I could put in a box and send off. So these are some of those items. And even though they're limited production, they're still done with heat hammer and anvils. These are some tension candlesticks that I started at Penland and I've kept making them. There they are in their forged state. Mezzaluna food chopper. And this is, the shape of this is pretty much an uninterrupted result of the hammering process. The way that handle kicks back like that is just from hitting it in the right spots. These fruit baskets, the ends are fusion welded, forge welded in the fire. It's coat hook. All of a sudden, we're making and selling a lot of these coat hooks. And if you were at the workshop yesterday, this is what I'm always trying to tackle: to take something and really kind of turn it inside out to give it some real 3 dimensions. It's the same type of lines that are in this log holder. You basically make a band, and you can do the majority of it cold. In a press, you pretty much do that. Turn it inside out. Andiron. I took the traditional pair of andirons and I turned it into 1 unit. So it sits on 3 points, holds the locks, hinges off the ground, and when you're sitting across the room, you can't see the back legs, and your fire just kind of floats. Solid bar, 1¼ inch solid bar, a fire set that is in our house. Early coat rack, current coat rack. These are a lot of fun because you're just playing at the forge. Much like the book sconces, these are all done individually over the anvil. Stainless pegs, a mirror. This wine rack is kind of in its own category. It's something very much non-blacksmithy. It's made out of 18-gauge cold-rolled steel. It's cold bent, and for whatever reason, we sell more of these than anything else, and we sell most of them overseas, specifically to Italy. So what these are the drops. And since we're cold bending this, steel is has memory, and it's very elastic. And in order to bend it and get it to keep its shape, you have to push it beyond its elastic limit. So each batch of steel that comes in is just a little different temperance-wise than the next. So every time I go to make a batch, I have to cut off a little bit, and we do these test bends to make sure they end up in the right spot. This was sent to me by an architect in Italy who put one up for one of his clients. So this is someone's kitchen in Italy. And this is Chris Humphreys. This is what was on Man Caves. And this picture was sent to me by my mom, who was on the TMZ website. And that's the only recording I have. You know, didn't watch the show, didn't hear from anyone, and you know, that's it. I've got this grainy picture. Book stands, trying to mimic the turned pages of the book into the stand. It's a shape that I've worked on for a long time. This is a coat rack. It's all about the internal components, no visual fasteners. So there's 1 screw that locks all 8 legs together. And currently on show at the Museum of Design in Atlanta is this funky railing. I got myself wrapped into this little bit of a design competition they had. They paired makers and interior designers to make a little vignette, and it's up to like March 13th or so when you can vote on it. So anyway, while brainstorming, I get this email from my partner that says, "How do you feel about Barry White?" I'm going, "Oh no, where's this going?" And so what she was doing was she was concocting out of her concrete tiles and my railing a steamy evening that is unfolded. You've got empty wine bottle and glasses, and some shoes that didn't make it upstairs, and a pair of panties that are hanging on the railing. And then once I caught her drift, I redesigned my railing so that even the railing was unraveling. So currently I'm working on this bench, and it's 9.5 feet across. And it's got the best owners in the world because they've been so patient. And it's going to be, I'm about ready to put this stainless rod, so it's going to be covered in stainless rods. Combination of hot and cold work, these hoops, solid bar. And this is, you know, an average day in the shop, and you did tweak something. If I can't get it in a hydraulic bender, then I'm using heat. And this is one of the propane forges that I have. This is a little clay model. So this is a small body of work that's very different from what I do normally, but you guys got to see the arc that this body of work took. This clay model turned into a 7-foot tall Corten sculpture, which turned into 4 Corten sculptures, which went to Untitled Gallery in Charlotte, which has access to a beautiful courtyard outside, and we spent a day installing them with these fancy bases. There they are installed. It's incipient 1 through 4. And then over time, the Cortens really started to set in, and they started really getting nice, rich, deep brown patina. And then they were stolen and sold for scrap. I left out a little information there because I know we need to keep moving along, but Hugh McCall of Bank of America was thinking of bringing them down to Texas, and of course this is late 2007, and things are starting to get a little ugly. So they came home, which was fine. I don't have the room to store them inside, so they were outside, and when times are tough and steel prices are attractive, things disappear. And they swiped 3 out of the 4, and they took it to the scrapyard and they cut them up. Steel is a very recyclable material, so one way of looking at it is those things are now something else. Now, there is a silver lining. 3 of the 4 were stolen. They left the skinniest looking one because it weighed less. But it found a beautiful home in Berks Garden, Virginia, and this is where it is now. The Appalachian Trail runs right on this ridge. Their house is to the left, their summer patio areas to the right. They have rotational graze cattle behind them. They even put in lighting. So one of the 4 got the most wonderful home ever. So we're very close to ending this, and I kind of fretted over how to end this because I didn't want to end with scrapyard photos. And when I'm cycling through my images, I realized I had folders and folders of teaching pictures, and a lot of these, me with students. And I'm going to leave you with this. This is the last image I'm going to show. And the process of how this came to be is, and this is the honest truth, I think it's probably the most incredible moment I've ever had around iron. And I conducted how that happened. So hold on one second, I'm going to shift gears.